Icelandic Vikings, maintaining peace through blood feuds. Icelandic blood feuds may seem like a barbaric and outdated form of justice, where innocent people can be caught in the crossfire of vendettas. However, the practice of blood feuding was a vital aspect of the Icelandic judicial system during the Middle Ages, serving to maintain social order. Blood feuds were intricate and multifaceted conflicts, defined by a deep-seated enmity between groups, expressed through acts of aggression, compromise, and dishonor. Despite this, historical sources, including the Icelandic sagas, show that blood feuds adhered to specific guidelines and procedures, forming part of the Viking justice system. Icelandic Vikings utilized blood feuds as a means to maintain social stability, particularly when Norse laws were absent, as they ensured fairness while facilitating peace. Thus, while the practice of blood feuding may seem brutal to modern sensibilities, it played a vital role in keeping Icelandic society safe and peaceful during the Middle Ages. Family justice: how blood feuds filled the void of formal legal systems. In ancient Iceland, a formal legal system and police were absent, leaving disputes to be resolved through customary practices. To settle grievances and disputes, regional Vikings would convene at thanes and vote on sentences for those found guilty. One accepted practice was for families to avenge the death of a kinsman, even if they were not blood-related. This included in-laws, foster children, and close friends. Njál's saga recounts a decades-long blood feud that includes acts of dishonor, violent clashes, and eventual reconciliation. Retaliation for a family member's death often involved financial compensation or acts of revenge, with members from both sides participating in the cycle of slaying and remuneration. The importance of publicity in Icelandic blood feuds. Why all slayings had to be highly public or properly published to avoid being considered mord. In the absence of a formal legal system, accusations of manslaughter in Iceland were not properly investigated, and evidence gathering was difficult. Therefore, announcing the death of a relative was a crucial first step in seeking revenge. Failing to publicly report the death of another, regardless of the circumstances, could be interpreted as committing the more severe crime of murder. However, violence was not always the only option for seeking justice. Making amends was also considered an honorable way to end a feud. Manslaughter allowed the victim's family members the opportunity to resolve the injustice without resorting to violent revenge. In contrast, slaughter was viewed as a shameful and premeditated murder. To make amends, the murderer needed to reconcile with the victim's kin and make their apology known publicly. Reconciliation was seen as the only way to pay for their actions and achieve peace. How kin could respond to feud slayings in medieval Iceland: reputations or retaliation. In Iceland, when a killing occurred, there were two options available to the victim's kin. They could seek justice through traditional means by accepting a payment, or they could retaliate with violence. The victim's family could either seek revenge by killing the perpetrator or demand compensation, known as a wergild. In Njál's saga, the exchange between Bergþóra and Halgr demonstrates that both slaying and compensation were viewed as acceptable forms of justice in Norse culture. Despite their husbands being on good terms, the two wives were openly hostile towards each other, with Halgr even resorting to abducting one of Njál and Bergþóra's slaves. When Njál accepts compensation, instead of retaliating with violence after the killing of his friend Gunnar, it satisfies neither him or his wife. As a result, Bergþóra sends Atli to kill Kol and demands that Njál pay for Gunnar's death. This exchange shows that both sides received what was owed to them, and neither payment went unanswered by the other. Feuds were typically initiated against families with fewer members. Archaeological findings have revealed that the kinship ties in ancient Iceland were not solely based on blood relations. Various forms of kinship connections, such as marriage, foster relationships, and illegitimate siblings, were also present. However, those with smaller kin groups were more vulnerable to blood feuds compared to those with widespread protection. This indicates that a person without kin could be eliminated without any fear of retaliation. In addition to kinship ties, one's social and political network was also influenced by their appearance before the Althane, a national assembly of smaller regional thanes. The assembly was accompanied by retainers known as thanemen, who provided social and political services. The number of thanemen for a person could range from a few to dozens. For instance, in 1121, Thorgils Oddsson and Hafliði Mason had 940 and 1,140 thanemen respectively. Failure to respond to a blood feud was considered a disgrace to one's reputation. Retaliation and revenge were crucial components of the justice system in medieval Iceland, closely linked with ideas of honor. Failure to address a crime or injury often resulted in greater dishonor for the victim and for their family. It was deemed dishonorable to ignore the murder of a kin, and a clan member's honorable response could restore the memory of the slain. However, taking revenge in an unfair or dishonorable way was also considered inappropriate. For instance, attacking the individual killer with a group of men was not acceptable. The act of retaliation needed to be carried out with a sense of fairness and restraint. Icelanders were more inclined than Norwegians to make payments to fulfill obligations, and thus their initial settlement to King Harald Hardrada for the murder of his father did not succeed. Halli, a Viking in the tale of the Snegla Halli, rejected the notion that he needed to pay Harald again, stating that his kinsman had agreed on a settlement on his behalf when he was a child. Breaking an already agreed upon settlement would be seen as a sign of weakness according to Halli. Annual meetings between Icelandic houses were used to resolve feuds. The Icelandic justice system relied on a network of thanes to resolve disputes between localities and regions, but ultimately the final authority rested with the Althane. Held annually, the Althane consisted of chieftains and appellate courts, and it served as a mediator for feuding kin groups. In Njal's saga, the Althane brought together individuals from all over Iceland to resolve a dispute between Gunnar and Otkell. When Otkell was killed during a confrontation with Gunnar, the case was brought before the Althane and temporarily resolved through financial means. The sole alternative to blood feuds or blood money was banishment or exile. Outlawry or exile were the only alternatives to revenge slaying or remuneration in the Icelandic feuding system. If an offender violated the feuding rules and committed a crime, they were outlawed and could be physically removed from society. The offender had two options, a temporary exile for 3 years or a lifetime banishment, which confined them to Iceland and made them vulnerable to being hunted. Grettir's saga illustrates the punishment as Grettir spends decades as an outlaw, gaining fame for his actions despite the potential consequences. He eventually returns to Iceland, but accidentally kills a chieftain's son and is outlawed once again. Although Icelandic society frowned upon exclusions and isolations, Grettir was praised in the saga as the most notable outlaw for 3 reasons. He was the longest-serving outlaw who had never been caught, he was the strongest man of his time, and he fought against goblins and other supernatural creatures. Additionally, his death was avenged in Constantinople, which was an unprecedented feat for an Icelander. Failure to end feuds could result in social and physical isolation for families. Preventing feuds from escalating into never-ending cycles of vendetta and social isolation was crucial for the well-being of families in medieval Iceland. Prolonged conflicts could create unsafe environments leading to violence, instability, and severely restricting travel and participation in political, social, and family activities. The economic activities of families could also be at risk if they became involved in feuds, taking time away from running their households. In Laxdæla's saga, Icelandic Vikings maintained peace during the fishing season, recognizing that fighting or causing conflicts could bring bad luck to their fishing activities. Similarly, in the saga of the people of Weapons Fjord, Thorkel refrained from attacking Bjarni while he was in the mountains taking care of his sheep. However, this sense of appreciation for avoiding conflicts sometimes faded away. In Eyrbyggja's saga, Snorri did not hold back from attacking and killing Arnkell, despite the potential consequences of escalating the conflict. The text describes how Snorri and his group approached Arnkell while he was bringing in hay, leading to a defense by Arnkell that ultimately resulted in his defeat and burial in the yard. Furthermore, since Godar chieftains had a stake in these conflicts, they would become involved on behalf of the people below them on the kinship chain. Overall, avoiding prolonged feuds was essential for preventing physical and social isolation in Icelandic society. Criticism of feuding practices in Icelandic sagas. The Icelandic Viking sagas serve as cautionary tales, exemplified by the stories of Gunnar and Njal in Njal's saga. In both cases, their propensity to respond to violence with violence ultimately leads to their downfall. While it is unclear whether the details in the ancient sagas were exaggerated by storytellers, the escalating violence within them is a reflection of the consequences that arise from failing to bring a feud to a close. Gunnar, a brave fighter and outsider from another land, is murdered in his own home by envious residents and betrayed by his deceitful wife. Njal, the wise and indomitable sage, also meets his end as a result of long-standing quarrels. The majority of those involved in these conflicts meet their demise in flames. In his book The Conflict of Law and Justice in the Icelandic Sagas, Penkak observes that the Icelandic legal system depicted in Njal's saga, which was written in the 13th century, is only surpassed by the system that replaced it. According to Penkak, one interpretation of the saga suggests that because fratricides and vendettas appear to be recurring themes in the early Icelandic history, The saga implies that the Scandinavian state, as represented by the Old Parliament, was inadequate in achieving peace and stability due to the constraints of Viking tribal customs. It is implied that with the spread of Christianity in the later 11th century, a more comprehensive and systematic approach to resolving national issues, such as crime and property rights, could be introduced. The functionality of Iceland's legal system, attributed to its unique geography, according to some historians. In 1983, William Ian Miller noted the unique aspects of feuding in Iceland due to the lack of centralized authority and a network of obligations. On the other hand, historian Jesse Byock has argued that the feuding system brought order to medieval Iceland. According to Byock, the conciliatory nature of the Icelandic practice can be attributed to geography and the isolation of the island, which alleviates some of the complexities, intrinsic hatred, and aggression associated with blood feuds. The Icelandic feud, he suggests, reflected a desire to maintain order, heavily influenced by Gudar. During feuding, respected men negotiated, and the courts and informal arbitrators applied public pressure to channel violence into moderating arenas of the courts, which brought stability to the society. However, some critics have pointed out that Byock's focus on groups rather than individuals and his overly positive view of orderly medieval Iceland have contributed to his overly positive view of the culture. Conclusion. The Viking legal system, while appearing harsh to modern sensibilities, served a purpose of promoting peace and order by facilitating reconciliation between murderers and the families of their victims. This was achieved through the payment of fines or compensations that gave the homicide some measure of value. While the system may appear outdated today, it was created for a specific context and era.